Tales from Earthsea, directed by Goro Miyazaki on behalf of Studio Ghibli. The first thing I have to say is I understand why Hayao Miyazaki walked out of this film. If I was in his position, I would have walked out of this film as well. This film plays less than a adaptation of Ursula K. Le Guin's Tales from Earthsea series and more of a son's explanation of his feelings of inadequacy to his father. Hayao Miyazaki walked out of this film because he basically thought, why have you pulled from your own personal feelings and experiences for this film instead of making the film based off the source material? It doesn't have to be completely accurate to the source material, none of Studio Ghibli's adaptations are, but based off of the themes and text itself. I agree. I feel like this film falls flat in many places as an adaptation and as a film in itself, whilst also it's just not a good watch. I'll take that back. It is a fine watch. It is a 2 to 2.5 out of 5 watch, in my opinion. As an adaptation, it is worse than that. It is maybe a 1. So, look, we're going to focus on the ways it's not a good adaptation here, but there are also other qualms I have for the movie. I will actually step back and say some good things about the film. It's not an absolute disaster. It's not a car crash. It's not horrible in every way. As a Studio Ghibli film, it is going to be beautiful. As always, Studio Ghibli films are lovingly, artistically created. They are beautiful. Everything about this is beautiful. The animation is good. The art is beautiful. The backgrounds are fantastic. They really made particularly like the towns and cities feel alive. All of that, very, very good. I expect that from a Studio Ghibli production. The music as well, fantastic, both the as in musical numbers and also the score or soundtrack, if you will. Fantastic, brilliant. Again, as always, Studio Ghibli, you are expecting that. Voice acting, there was just Aaron or Lebanon. I felt like his voice acting was all over the place simply because this is actually a criticism in terms that wasn't related to the adaptation. The characters who are Lebanon and Tahanu, spoiler alert, they are depicted as looking maybe mid-teens. I would say at most 14, they're meant to be about 17. They don't look it. Their voices at times don't feel like they fit the way they look. They fit maybe actually no, Lebanon doesn't. Lebanon sounds far older than 17 years old as well. But like at least Tahanu, her voice kind of fits maybe a 17-year-old, but the way they look, they don't fit. Everyone else though is very good. Tenar and Ged, their voice actors are very good, and even Cobb as well, their voice acting was very good as well. Just I felt like Tahanu and Lebanon, theirs just didn't fit. Okay, now we'll focus more on the adaptation itself. My first annoyance is this wasn't an Earthsea adaptation. It was a kind of adaptation of The Farthest Shore, but also pulling from aspects of the other books, pulling from aspects of Tahanu, maybe a couple of things from the earlier books, like the first Wizard of Earthsea. There was a mention of the tombs of Atuan, and then it doesn't really go. I feel like The Other Wind came out after this movie, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I feel like it did. But it felt like they were like, okay, we kind of need to include things from the other books, let's pull them in. But that is also a failure of it, because my biggest thing was it felt like this movie can't be watched as a standalone either, because as an adaptation it falls short because it doesn't adapt many of the best parts of the Tales of Earthsea. It adapts a lot of The Farthest Shore and like the boring parts of Tahanu, and it takes aspects of the earlier books and takes it away from Ged and puts it into Lebanon's character. But even if you didn't know any of the context of the Earthsea books, the movie does rely heavily on you having information about those books going into it. For example, she talks about the Tombs of Atawan, saying, oh, Ged rescued me from the Tombs of Atawan. Someone who hasn't read the Earthsea books, you're like, oh, she was maybe in some tombs or something. You don't kind of get the weight behind her saying that. Then Cobb and Ged have a conversation about, you know, their past and the drylands, but you don't know, like, there is some explanation of the drylands, but it's not very in detail, and the drylands are a lot of the farther shore. And then it's like, what's going on here? And then the shadow that is following Ged in the first book, that's basically in Lebanon's character. And, you know, it's kind of then kind of explained, yeah, the shadow of Lebanon is following him. But it's not really explained. It's explained that it is his own, like, fear of life and of himself is that shadow, and it's haunting him. But it doesn't really connect as strongly as, but you and also you understand the shadow more when you've read the Earthsea book. So there are these things that they're discussing, but are actually important to the characters, and they're used as exposition to kind of make, oh yeah, see, this is how the characters know each other. But to actually understand the weight of it, you need to have read the Earthsea books. So you're kind of stuck with, as an adaptation, it doesn't adapt enough, and it doesn't adapt well enough. And as going into it not caring about the adaptation, there is this information that seemingly, if you don't know, you don't get the full weight of the things that are being said. And that is my biggest qualm. It is like, either go hard on the adaptation or simply completely adapt The Farthest Shore in its entirety on its own, because I think that could work, and that could work kind of as a standalone as well, because Tennant, I don't believe she is in The Farthest Shore at all. I think she is at the very, very end, but she's not really in there. And then you're not really dealing with the Tombs of Atawan stuff, and you're not dealing with Tahanu or anything. You're simply adapting The Farthest Shore, and I think that could have worked. I feel like they did the other ones because they're like, well, we're going to adapt it. We want to use the Earthsea name, and also we want to use the dragons. So the dragons are beautifully animated in this as well, and dragons obviously are very cool, and they pop up a lot throughout Studio Ghibli films. So that was the biggest flaw, where it was like, you need to decide, are you doing an adaptation or are you doing a completely your own thing? And look, Studio Ghibli adaptations aren't very faithful to the stories. Arrietty isn't super faithful. Howl's Moving Castle isn't super faithful to the original text. So it's fine. It doesn't need to be, but it's just like, it wasn't very good. And as I said, it felt like they were pulling from a lot of the books to try and add them to the story of The Farthest Shore. And in doing that, they jumbled stuff up. So you have Ged and Lebanon going to Tennant, and Tahanu's there. And then, you know, they do have the accurate part of where they go to the city to try and find information, and Lebanon is kidnapped, and then Ged has to rescue him. That's very accurate. But then they pulled in Cobb slightly earlier, and they had henchmen, and that kind of felt a little bit like in the first book when Ged goes to the individuals, kind of that lady who hires him, but also it felt like one of the stories from the Tales from Earthsea short story collection as well. So I felt like they kind of like pulled all of those into The Farthest Shore. And when Ged and Lebanon go to Tennant, they kind of do the whole thing where Ged is helping Tennant out, but even that sells that the power of that really short, because in Tahanu, Ged is a broken man, and through connecting with Tennant and Tahanu, he kind of comes out of his shelf, and he accepts he's no longer Archmage. Like that's Ged's whole story in that book. And it's like, now we're just gonna have him help farm a little bit, and we'll drop that he was a goat farmer in there. And it's like, okay, it just felt like, they were by pulling all of these things in, they thought, okay, we'll try and appeal to all of the Earthsea fans. And frankly, as an Earthsea fan, if they'd simply just adapted The Farthest Shore, even with like context missing, that would have been better. The Farthest Shore, I think, of all of the Earthsea books, I guess the Tombs of Watawan as well, could be a standalone. You know, it's the one that most is like a kind of fulfilling story, because it is Labanon's story of becoming king. Obviously, I like that in subsequent books there's even more about Labanon and you see him develop further as an individual, but fine, you don't need those, you know. Like The Other Wind is that main part of it, and even in Tahanu, Labanon is there for a little bit, but he's not completely there. But The Farthest Shore could have just been adopted on its own. They could have just said The Farthest Shore. That would have been a fine film to adapt, but then they pulled all these other things into it, and it became, as someone who had read the books, a bit like, why are they doing this? I don't need all of these other parts that were from the other books to make this make sense. It will make sense anyway. And just like how they jumbled the stories and the plots up, they kind of jumbled the characters up as well. Like I mentioned before, they took things about Ged's story in the first book and gave them to Labanon. So Labanon is being chased by a shadow of himself, just like Ged was being chased by a shadow of himself. But where with Labanon, they make him kill his father, but it is meant to be the part of him that is maybe the evil part, that is the shade inside him that then gets split, it seems. But it kind of makes Labanon irredeemable. And he's like, oh, I'm going to go face my crimes. I'm like, wait, what? Huh? Whereas with Ged, the shade is his dumb actions himself, which leads to, yes, someone else's death, but it is a separate entity to him. But also, Ged kind of has to deal with the consequences of that forever, even just with the mark of the scar on his face. It's always there. But that also, he's not, he doesn't kind of go into a different zone, like a bad zone in the book. So that was also added to Labanon's character. And I felt like, why is that there? And, visually, some of the stuff to do with the shade, so kind of like when he's dreaming, like Ged is dreaming, he sometimes slips into the dry land. That kind of feels like Labanon did do that at least once. That was very cool. That was very well done. I'll give them that. But it just like that was Ged's thing, and they put it onto Labanon. And even like the other characters, like Tenar was the character who I thought was most accurately portrayed. But also that's because a lot of the character development happens in Tahanu, and they didn't go super deep, so there were the things that would have developed a character. So it's kind of Tenar's character, how she probably would be between Tahanu and the Farthest Shore. Basically during the Farthest Shore, what she would be like, because we don't see her in that book until maybe the very end, I think. So it was a bit like, huh? What's going on here? But at least with her, it wasn't as offensive. With Ged, like I said as well, they took away some of his development, and I get it, they were maybe trying to concentrate on Labanon, because I know Studio Ghibli is meant to be a family thing, and typically kids like watching things that are slightly older than them, so Labanon, meant to be 17, makes sense with the audience, the family audience. But Ged also, there isn't that major, like, he's talking, by the Farthest Shore, Ged is meant to be much older. They call Ged and Tenar old man, old lady, but they look like they're in their 30s. And so Ged is maybe he's supposed to be older at this point. He's supposed to be wise and old, but also missing a step a little bit towards the end of the book. But he's not in this at all. And even into, like I said, they pulled in him becoming a farmer for Tenar. They pulled that into it, but that's missing the, him trying to overcome his depression. That's not there. That character development's not there. And Tahanu, I feel like they completely messed about with her, because she's meant to be the Tahanu at the beginning of the book Tahanu for most of the story, but she's already sort of reconciled with her desire to want to live, but that doesn't happen until about halfway through Tahanu, towards the end of the Tahanu book. So she's scared of them, and she's introverted, but she's also past that as well. She is past that point where she wants to live for Tenar, because Tenar gave her life, and she does appreciate Tenar early on in the book, but you don't see that until she goes through more trials and tribulations, and it's very all over the place. And again, like, they introduce this love kind of thing between Tenar and Lebanon, which isn't there in the books, but it's fine, you know, that's fine. Like I said, Studio Ghibli adaptations aren't accurate like that, but it felt like it was there, but also it's like one conversation, and then Tahana's like, yeah, but actually I quite like this guy. I don't know, it just felt like, and then she doesn't talk, but then all of a sudden she's talking a lot to both Ged and Lebanon, which obviously in Tahanu she eventually opens up to Ged, but like with Lebanon it's again one conversation, and they're talking to each other. So it's like, what are you doing with arguably the best written character in all of the books? And again, all of it is to serve Goro Miyazaki's desire to create a story where he is basically doing a father-son relationship, because he basically turns Lebanon and Ged into a father-son relationship, which they aren't quite in the books. They are more of a student and teacher, which is, you know, can veer into a father-son relationship, but it doesn't always. And in the Father Short, it doesn't. It doesn't become a father-son relationship. It is very much a teacher-student relationship throughout. And it, like, Hayao Miyazaki probably saw right away, are you supposed to be Lebanon and I'm supposed to be Ged? Fuck this, I'm leaving. And honestly, I would have as well. I totally would have myself, because it is probably the weakest theme in the movie. It's like, okay, I guess he needs some fatherly guidance because he kills his dad, which again, it also wasn't kind of visually, you knew that happened. It kind of looked like he knocked him out when I was watching it, and he's like, yeah, I killed my father. I'm like, wait, what? You killed your dad? When did that happen? So it, yeah, I could keep going. Like, I mean, Cobb as a character, again, was just as scary as you thought Cobb would be, but also then there's that kind of confusion with Cobb kind of embodying not just Cobb, but also embodying the cat. I can't remember. I think it's the story with the slaves in the Tales from Earthsea short stories. I can't remember the name of it. It's like that character, and also kind of the lady who hires Ged in the first book. It's like those three characters combined creates Cobb. Again, they use exposition to explain kind of what Cobb is like instead of showing it. And also, frankly, I got an hour into this movie and I'm like, when is this finishing? It's just disappointing. It's just not a good film. Like, I gave it a 2.5 on my Letterboxd, but honestly, I might revise that down. 2.5 seems a bit generous, to be honest. I think the visuals and the music are carrying it. Like, they give Tahanu a song, and it's beautifully sung. That section, and like Lebanon's watching it, and you hear the song, you see the meaning of it, you see the sight, and like, okay, actually, and like Lebanon breaks down, and look, that's not in Earthsea, but as its own thing is very well done. So hats off for that, Goro. Kind of see how you did that in From Up on Poppy Hill. We won't talk about Earwig and the Witch. But it's like moments. There are moments that are good, but it's not enough to make up for how bad the rest of the film is. Maybe visually, maybe like technically as an animation director, it's good, but all other aspects of the film are just lacking. And like I said at the start, Hayao Miyazaki was completely justified in walking out of this film. I would have as well. And just a reminder, for April, the movie we'll be watching is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, simply because I've not watched this movie and I want to watch it, and I'll read the book as well in April. So that is the April pick. Thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of Tales from Earthsea. God, I think, oh my god, I just don't know what to say. I was just disappointed. And even if I wasn't an Earthsea fan, this movie wasn't good. It was probably the, I mean, other than Earwig and the Witch, probably the weakest Studio Ghibli movie I've watched, which kind of makes sense. Sorry, Goro. At least you made from Up on Poppy Hill.